How about this? A special edition of your boys, Matt and Paul, Matt Barrie, Paul Finebaum, ESPN College Football YouTube channel. We're getting ready for Get Up. So this is really just a nice little rehearsal, Paul, for everything we're going to talk about on the television program. Rankings come out last night. Some big shakeups. What were your initial thoughts on what we saw?
Well, obviously, I was really interested, Matt, in Alabama. Could they hang around? And they didn't. Their path is very narrow. The fact that the ACC is looking at two bids now, the whole Big 12 conundrum, I think those were the tree toppers.
Yeah, because when you look at the rankings, there's that cluster of three SEC teams in Alabama 13, Ole Miss 14, South Carolina 15. To me, that's notable in that in a season where we've seen chaos, Paul, if those teams were further down, I'd say forget it, they're out. But I don't know that their story's done yet because of everything that's in front of them, including Clemson, including a Miami team that still has to play Syracuse, SMU's. I mean, it's just going to be fascinating with the teams that are above them.
Yeah, and Matt, what if we ended up having a debate between Alabama and Clemson? Think about this. Clemson beat Georgia, what, by 30 points, 31 points, and then you'd have Alabama that beat Georgia could end up getting jumped by an ACC team. I mean, that might be the worst scenario I could come up with at this early hour. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of minutia, but the idea that Alabama needs upsets to get into a 12-team college playoff is still hard for me to say in this close to the Saban era.
Yeah, the fact that we are saying they need help and that they need things to go in front of them is just it's a different 17 years that we've seen in Tuscaloosa. Overall, how would you rate the committee's job now with two rankings left?
Yeah, I don't think it's that difficult. For all the outrage that we had a week ago, it's calmed down, and it remains the Indiana story remains the biggest conundrum to me. How I thought they were done at 3 o'clock Saturday, and then the stumbling of Alabama and Ole Miss and others, Colorado in particular, helped them get back in, and it's not really worth the outrage anymore. They're in the playoffs. The fact that the Big Ten is in such a strong position. I mean, I look up there and try to figure out what has Penn State done. Notre Dame, lost to Northern Illinois, doesn't seem to have had a big impact on them. The ACC, if it lands two, has done very well, especially with one of its expansion teams that nobody could understand, that literally had to pay ransom money to get in to the league. And then, here I am circling back to the SEC. But I mean, I ran into people before the season that kept saying five, six, and I kept saying four would be a good number. And the fact that it could be three is one of the bigger upsets I have seen.
All right, so stay there for a second because there are some that would argue maybe the SEC is still overvalued. Do you believe that? Are they undervalued? Like where are we with the SEC and how the perception is?
Listen, Matt, you know where I work, but I can't say they're undervalued because right now I would put three SEC teams in if I'm sitting there at the head of that committee. The A&M situation is interesting. I just can't imagine A&M winning against Texas and Georgia. That's not in my card.
Yeah.
I think the fact that there were a lot of really good teams in the SEC this year that simply couldn't be consistent, and that's going to be the epitaph of the league this year. The road is very difficult, and I'm it's not for another day, but I think there will be a chilling effect for some schools. But I think Tennessee is very deserving of the playoff. Obviously, Georgia, Texas are if Texas looks terrible Saturday night, then that opens that conversation as well.
Let's go to the Big Ten. Do you think the Big Ten is overvalued?
I do, but again, when you have four teams that play quality level football and the rest are in the hinterlands, it's really hard to have a good evaluation. And the committee group clearly likes a school that only has zero losses or one loss, i.e., Indiana and Penn State. But the idea that Illinois is a ranked team, pretty laughable to me.
Yeah, and look, I'd like to nitpick at this more because Penn State really hadn't done much at 10-1. We talked about where they are in the grand scheme of things. The Indiana schedule conundrum. I think Oregon or Ohio State, I don't think anybody has a problem with them based on their resume and what they've done. But you can't really pick at a lot of this, Paul, because again, there's 12 teams. I think Boise State is incredibly overvalued based on their resume and what they've done. But I just don't think we can get too deep into it because you got 12 teams. 12 teams have to get in. You can't just go like here. But I've always been of the thought, just hell with it. Put in who you want. I mean, if you legitimately think Alabama or Ole Miss could beat Indiana, then throw them in instead. I don't think it needs to be so resume driven.
Man, you've been around college sports a long time. That's just not the way it works. But I mean, I can't get that upset. I mean, last year, you think about the Florida State versus Alabama, Georgia. I mean, that was a real debate. TCU Baylor 10 years ago. This is not really a debate. I can't stand up and scream and holler that an Ole Miss team that had a chance to finish the season and then lose to a 5-1. In Alabama, listen, I spent most of my life in Alabama. I can't fight for them. I'm not going to. And I know some people will say, well, yeah, I would argue for Alabama to get in at 0-12. Well, no, I wouldn't. To me, they cost them. I mean, they didn't even if they had even been competitive, Matt, but they were not even competitive to a team that lost 34-3 to Texas.
Well, that was the thing this morning as we were prepping for Get Up and the reaction maybe to the Alabama ranking. Well, it's like they weren't. It'd be different if they lost game-winning field goal to Oklahoma. And it was just a remarkable finish. They got blown out at Oklahoma. And so there's a lot left on the table. But I still think, Paul, we live in a world where a three-loss team could get in.
Yeah, I think Georgia is the best of that group, obviously. They're in the SEC game, and you can't keep Georgia out. Now, there might be another one out there, depending on circumstances. But I'm not. I mean, I was pretty angry a week ago. I'm not angry anymore. I mean, the teams I got angry for let me down. So I can't. Listen. In spite of all of our critics, and you and I have a few out there. You've got to be real. You have to be true to form. And to me, if the SEC ends up with 3, then they did it to themselves.
How about that? Thanksgiving Eve, Paul is not going to get mad anymore. That's where we have grown, and we are thankful for that. If you enjoyed this rankings reaction, lucky for you, you get Paul and Sports Center in a few minutes. You get both of us along with Heather Dinich on Get Up this morning. And so rankings reaction in the books. Here's what we know. There's still a lot of football left to play in the final week of the regular season.